get educated so that you can have peace of mind. Doesn't mean every investment's going to go right, because it's not, but at least if you understand it, you can have peace of mind when something does go wrong.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in.
All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Freedom Point. So glad that you're with us here today. Also, really appreciate the feedback from some of our listeners who have told me that they've gone back into the archives of the last 50 episodes and basically binge listened to our episodes. In fact, I had one of our guests not too long ago messaged me that he listened to all of our podcast episodes while sitting in a deer stand over the weekend. So very exciting. I have another fantastic guest with me today, Kyle Kuderewski. Kyle, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Hey, Jeremy, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And deer stand sounds like a perfect place to catch up on some listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to follow back up with that listener to see if they were successful in their hunt. But maybe I'll get back to my listening audience a little bit later on that. So just a real quick bio on Kyle here before we kind of get started. Kyle is an engineer turned investor. He got into the vacation rental industry, became passionate about generating passive income, and decided to join Empire Flippers Capital, which is now known as WebStreet. One thing that I have in common with Kyle is we're both fairly active in our personal lives. Kyle enjoys triathlon, skiing, traveling, boating, and anything active. So I also resonate with all of those particular activities, plus some. So really excited to know that I have somebody like yourself on the call here today. And just, again, really appreciate you joining us. So beyond kind of what I stated here, Kyle, what would, maybe you can kind of take us back into, how you initially got, your investing journey started, what that, trajectory has looked like, and kind of bring us from that point up till today.
Yep. Thanks for the intro. So like you said, started out, went to engineering school, joined a nice, comfortable corporate America engineering role. Was in that for nearly a decade. Treated me well, great start to life, but I knew I didn't want to stay in that role forever. Just had an entrepreneurial itch, really got into investing, just educational investing, Dave Ramsey, all the basics, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and actually saved up and purchased a home, me and my wife, and above the garage was a little mother-in-law suite. And, we put most of our savings into the down payment. And so we were trying to scrounge to get our savings back up. And I threw that little mother-in-law suite on Airbnb just in a halfway manner. And we were renting out every single weekend nonstop. And one of the things I believe in pretty passionately now is you should always follow market trends. So don't fight the market. If it's telling you to do something, kind of lean into it. And so we evaluated the market here. I live on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, on the East Coast, so a little beach town. And I ended up getting into the vacation rental industry. So that's like the very short version of it. But somewhere in between there, I got very educated about investing and knew that I didn't want to stay in corporate America. I wanted to passively, generate enough passive income to be comfortable and be able to travel and do the things I love. And that eventually led me to what I'm doing now.
That's great. So you had a background in engineering, and then that kind of prompted you then to maybe kind of exit that original, plan to continue to, be in the engineering field. And then you decided to transition into, owning real estate. To me, it sounds like you just kind of dabbled in it. Maybe it was a little bit of a side hustle for you. And then
That's
that
right.
side hustle all of a sudden grew into something bigger. Am I saying that correctly?
That's spot on. That's it. It was a side hustle. Then ended up having multiple properties and, eventually decided, okay, let's take the leap. Let's leave the corporate America role and kind of bet on ourselves. And there's other investing channels we can talk about as well, but that was the primary one that allowed me to make the leap.
Yeah. What were maybe some of those lessons that you kind of learned early on, getting into the real estate, business? I personally, we own an RV, and we decided a couple of years that we were going to start renting it out. And it's pretty cash lucrative for us. I mean, I can't believe that people are willing to spend $600-700 a night, to rent an RV. But they are, and we continue to monetize, that toy, if you will, that we owned, in a way that we can create some additional cash flow for ourselves. So maybe what were some of those kind of early lessons that you learned, when you initially got, started in Airbnb?
Yeah. I mean, that's a similar story. That's interesting with the RV. Some of these will be pretty obvious, but you do need to have cash put away. I mean, things are going to happen. Refrigerator is going to break, whatever the case is. So you need to have the funds. Don't stretch yourself too thin. The other thing is get really, really well educated on what you're doing. I don't know if you experienced any of this on when you started out on the RV side, but on the rental side, on the vacation rental side, there was all these resources out there that taught you how to automate. Everybody has this fear of property management, and yeah, there's times where it's going to be annoying, but you can do a lot of things to make it much more automated. From automated locks, automated messaging, uh, price tools to make sure you're bringing in the most revenue. Just there's all these tools out there, and there's literally just courses on YouTube, books on Amazon, and so just really, really get educated on what you're investing in. And I would also say on some of the other investments in more passive manners, the same thing applies. Get educated so that you can have peace of mind. Doesn't mean every investment's going to go right, because it's not. But at least if you understand it, you can have peace of mind when something does go wrong, and you can react to it.
Yeah. Let's talk more about today. So let's maybe unpack, what you're focused on at WebStreet.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background, like you said, this the vacation rental came about as a side hustle. At that same time, I was looking at other side hustles, and I discovered online businesses, and we can get into what types of businesses those are. But one of the big players in the space was a brokerage called Empire Flippers. So if Jeremy builds a website, he wants to sell it, um, he would go to Empire Flippers and they would find a buyer. So one of the largest brokerages in the space. I learned about that, and I ended up going the other route, like I said, in the vacation rental side, but I kept an eye on that industry. And when I was ready to leave my previous role, I learned enough about the online business industry that I decided that was what I wanted to go into. I was going to continue to do the vacation stuff on the side. It was pretty automated. It still is, but this is an industry I want to go into. And so that's what brought me into the online business world.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. So I assume these are e-commerce type businesses. I'll just give you a really good, probably bad example, but my son recently decided that he wanted to start up a drop shipping business.
Yep.
Okay. So he started up Jack's Survival Shop. All right. Just set up an account on Shopify, learned the lessons and the failures and all the things that he had to learn about setting up and running a drop shipping business. So there was a lot of lessons, obviously, that he learned through that. But let's just say hypothetically, Jack wanted to scale up that business. And in order to do so, he needed some cash in order to scale that business. And maybe he needed some mentorship and some leadership as well. Is that kind of the genesis of what WebStreet does? Can you really unpack what you're focused on?
Yeah, I should have definitely taken it a step further from the Empire Flipper side. So, and not a bad example at all, by the way. So let's just name some of the types of online businesses. There's drop shipping and e-commerce. There's content and display advertising. There's Amazon FBA, Amazon Kindle, software as a service, and those are just a few. So what we kept hearing at Empire Flippers was, "Hey, I want to scale, or I want to invest in online businesses." And for years, we just kept saying, "No, that's not what we do. We're just a brokerage. You can buy one, you can sell one." And kind of tying it back to what I said earlier, we eventually listened to the market and we started WebStreet. WebStreet allows you to invest passively into online businesses. And those online businesses are run by many of the best operators in the world, or portfolio managers in the world. And that's due to the network of people that have bought and sold through Empire Flippers over the years. So we've had drop shipping operators come on. We've had all those other monetizations or types of businesses that I just said come on. And we're the first, 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 we're platform out there that allows people to passively invest in online businesses. They've been able to do it in real estate, with Fundrise and whatever. They've been able to do it in art and wine and whiskey, all types of different things. But online businesses were not available until about 2.5 years ago. So that's WebStreet in a nutshell.
Okay, so essentially, WebStreet is a private equity firm that specializes in bringing syndicated opportunities to investors to invest into e-commerce businesses.
Yeah, so we get that analogy a lot, like a micro PE. So we find the best operators out there. We raise the money. Investors are able to, invest, obviously, and then those operators go out, purchase the businesses, and they run them and they grow them, and then the investors receive their cut, which is 2/3 of the profits every quarter, and then, of course, when they sell the businesses, and then the portfolio managers get their cut as well as us. So it's a 2/3, 1/3 split.
Structured a lot like a real estate syndication in that regard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So how do you find opportunities to bring to your investor network? And second part to that question is, how do you vet those operators?
Yeah, that's really, really solid question. So let's start with the operators first. So like I said, the Empire Flippers audience is huge. And there's, of course, many other quality brokerages out there as well. But between, just being in the online business space, going to conferences for years, having people do repeat buy and sells, et cetera, we had a handful that we knew were like, these are top-notch operators. Other than that, we go out and we just scour the market for them. And then we have a very thorough vetting process. Actually, on our site, there's a blog post laying it out. So it's a multi-step application process. We have the operators come in and do due diligence, in quotations, on a site they would purchase, tell us what their growth plan would be, et cetera. And then to date, we've raised over $30 million for these operators. And that's for about 12 to 15 of them. So it's a very, very selective process, because at the end of the day, our investor returns are by far our most important metric, right? If the returns aren't there, nothing else works. So that's how we find the operators. That's how we vet them. And then how do we find the opportunities? When we initially started out, we only bought through Empire Flippers. Now we are basically broker agnostic. So we knew to scale to the point that we wanted to, we would have to go to other marketplaces. And we've now been doing that. We have investment advisors, or acquisitions advisors, I should say, that help the operators go find these businesses. But more than just finding them, we're really, we have ultimate veto power on whether they're able to purchase them with investor money or not. So they bring them in, they analyze it. Is it declining? Is it increasing? All these other metrics on why is it a good purchase or not? And then ultimately, if we're not getting it at a good price, then the returns aren't going to be as good as they should. So it's it's kind of a long-winded answer, but you see me kind of getting excited about it. It's something we really worked hard on to get right.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is you're like the Shark Tank of the e-commerce private equity industry.
That's right. Yeah. And one other thing that I think is worth noting on that point is these funds can be anywhere from $1 to $3 million, something like that. The portfolio managers or operators, I use that term interchangeably, they have to put in 5% of the fund, of their own money, into the fund. So they have a lot of skin in the game. On a $2 million fund, they got $100,000 in there. So it's not something where we're just raising money and letting them go to town. They have to put a lot of skin in the game themselves. So that's another one of the requirements.
Well, I would be doing my listeners a disservice if I didn't ask you the question about some of the successes and failures. Have you had any opportunities that have gone, full cycle, to date? Have there been any, deals that investors have maybe lost capital?
Yeah, so definitely worth talking about. And we can link our most recent kind of scorecard as well in the show notes, so you can go see how each fund does. Like I said, they're paid out by quarter. So each quarter you get 2/3 of the profits. We're still averaging right at 3% per quarter, which is about 12% per year. We project 20%. So we're pretty well on target for that, because that doesn't include the sale of the businesses. I'll tell you both the good and the bad. So we have had one operator we've actually gone ahead and replaced. His businesses weren't doing well. Rather than just sell the sites and say it's your loss. We went and found another operator and we've replaced them. And that's in the last couple months. So I don't have a turnaround story on that yet. Hopefully down the road I will. But most of the deals are right on par for 3% per quarter. We've had some that have done 10% in a single quarter. So it really varies. On the full cycle thing, we just listed our first assets for sale. So we started January of 2021. Oh gosh, we're almost 3 years old now. I keep saying 2.5. We just listed our first sites, and that's right on target with what we said. We said typically we'll hold between 2 and 4 years. You got to get past the 1 year mark so you can negate capital gains. It's not a set in stone period. We might have one that sells at a year and a month, or we might have one that takes 5 or 6, but 2 to 4 years is what we project. And we just listed our first assets at the 3 year mark. So.
Great. Are these investment opportunities, are these listed as a 506B or C offering?
Yes. Yeah. So they're listed as accredited 506C, right? So no general solicitation. We have tested the waters with crowdfunding through WeFunder, where people can come in if they're non-accredited, which has been somewhat mixed results. I think we'll probably continue to do it. The terms are obviously a little less when you bring in another party. They're not as favorable as the accredited investor terms, but they're still, you're getting exposure to the asset class for a much lower minimum.
Sure. One thing that I know about investing into real estate, is there are tax depreciation benefits to investing in real estate according to IRS rules. When you're investing into a syndication that involves a e-commerce related business, I would assume that there are not the same types of tax benefits to investors because you're really not depreciating a piece of real estate. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, so it's that's a smart question as well. It's a little tricky. It's definitely not as advantageous as real estate, but there are still assets, especially with your FBA, which is fulfilled by Amazon. So they have inventory. That's a 15-year straight line depreciation is a short answer. So you do have depreciation. You get a K1 for each of these funds that you're invested in each year, and you get that 15-year straight line depreciation on those funds. But yeah, not to the advantageousness of real estate for sure, but better than nothing.
Yeah. Well, I know that you're active in a lot of different things outside of the conversation that we're having today. So I'm just kind of curious with your, enjoyment of doing triathlons and skiing and traveling and boating, how do you manage that lifestyle on the personal side in addition to, crushing it at WebStreet?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, one of the big drivers for me, whether it was WebStreet or somewhere else, in becoming a passive investor and gaining that freedom back, was being able to enjoy those things. Now, one of the things working online really allows you to do is kind of set your own hours, work from wherever there's internet, which is, a huge perk to working online again and investing in online businesses. So it's all about balance. I definitely enjoy getting up in the morning, getting the workout in early, and then trying to crush it for a few hours before doing anything, fun or rewarding. Well, yeah, I have a planner that I stick to pretty, religiously to help with that. I don't know. How do you do it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. As it relates to my own, activities that I'm involved with, I know that if I don't do the thing, in the morning, right, it's just not going to happen. Right. Most of my listening audience knows that I've got 4 children. They're all very actively involved in, athletics and sports. And, one of the ways that I continue to stay, active myself is I just coach their teams. Right. Because if I coach their teams, I'm going to be on the field, I'm going to be on the rink, I'm going to be right there with them, getting in my own version of my own exercise. So yeah, I appreciate that. If you don't schedule it, more than likely it's not going to happen. So most certainly you have to make it a priority, especially, as people maybe continue to grow or expand their families. It just becomes a lot more difficult, to get in the things that you need to for your own personal, well-being, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's a good one with the kids as well. So we don't have any children yet, but we did just get a new second dog, a puppy dog that she's a sweetheart. She's a hunting dog as well. To go back to that, a bird dog. But she keeps me running every morning. Is it either that or she's going to be chewing through stuff in the house. It's like, all right, well, I don't really have a choice today. So yeah, it's all about your environment, I would say, putting those
Yeah.
boundaries in place.
Well, let's speak specifically to the passive investor, right? What type of advice would you give to a potential passive investor that's new to the investing space? Maybe they've never invested before in a syndication, whether that be through real estate or some other asset class or e-commerce. What would be some advice that you'd give to that individual before they decided to make that next step?
Yeah, so I hit earlier on the get educated part. I won't hammer that home again, but I think that's first and foremost. Second would be really, really doing your due diligence. You've asked a lot of good questions today on track record. That's kind of an obvious one. Don't be afraid to, whether it's our investment advisors or somebody else's that you're talking to really ask the questions that you need answered. One of the biggest ones I would say that I don't see people do that often is ask for references. Okay, you're around, you've raised $30 million or whatever the amount is. Who are your top investors? How many of them are repeat? Can I speak to two or three of them to see what they like and don't like? That seems like a very fair question, right? But not many people would ask along those lines. Dig into the financial models. They should have really robust financial models. Even if you're not, an accountant or super deep in the business world, just give it a spot check and make sure they know what they're talking about. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. I know that's super cliche, but the bells and whistles aren't always it. Like stick to the blocking and tackling and what works. And yeah, I don't know. Would you add anything to that?
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It really comes down to, the sponsor and you're, really trusting, their ability to, execute, whatever that business plan happens to be. And that's one thing that, WebStreet, allows for investors to be able to enter into your investment opportunities on the backs of your own due diligence, right?
That's right.
You're personally investing, yourself into these deals, but also, performing, the due diligence, on the sponsor and really stress testing, the operator's assumptions, which I think is incredibly valuable, given the fact that, most people that are capable of investing into real estate syndications are probably busy crushing their day jobs. They're probably busy, with 1, 2, or 4 kids, right? And they just don't have the time, or the wherewithal, or maybe the education, to spend enough time, really challenging the pro forma.
Yeah, 100%. And looking at, something we put a lot of thought and effort into when we built out our model, and I know a lot of the other investments that I like do this as well, is like looking at the incentives. Are they aligned? Are the operators in the company you're investing through and the investor incentive aligned? If you're the only one with skin in the game, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So yeah, those are the 4 or 5 things I would even just to start with before making an investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kyle, what is next up on your personal or professional bucket list?
Yeah, good question. Really focused on building WebStreet right now. It's cool that we saw all this traction at the beginning from Empire Flippers, but we're still very much a startup. We're starting to get a strong track record, but really putting these systems in place to scale is my primary focus. Next on the bucket list, I really, really enjoy traveling. My wife and I do. We spent a few months out of the country each year. And one of the cool things about WebStreet is because we're all remote, we get together once or twice a year somewhere in the world, and we work together and we have fun together and eat together and all that stuff. So our next company meetup is going to be in Argentina in the beginning of the year, and I'm hoping to sneak over to Patagonia. That's a bucket list place for me. So I'm hoping to sneak over there and do some hiking for 3, 4, 5 days. That would be top of my list right now.
That sounds awesome. Well, make sure you put that on your calendar so that it happens. And
That's right.
knock it out in the morning before it gets too busy.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, good. Well, what as it relates to investing in e-commerce businesses through syndications, are there any books or podcast recommendations that you could make to our listening audience if they wanted to learn more about that type of an investing strategy?
Yeah, so Empire Flippers in general, they run their own pod. We're completely separate now. I know I keep mentioning them. That was always part of the the plan was, we couldn't be a part of Empire Flippers. There's conflict of interest or whatever. They run a really good podcast over there. It's called the Opportunity Podcast by Empire Flippers, and they go really deep on online businesses, and they touch a bit on investing. So the Opportunity Podcast, it's by Empire Flippers, is great. There's one that a real estate friend of mine runs called Ice Cream with Investors. It's not focused on online businesses, but it is real estate syndication, probably similar to your audience. And he does a great job over there as well. So those would be two. But I think some of the other brokerages, Quiet Light is another brokerage that we purchased a lot of businesses from. I think I know they have a very good podcast. I just can't remember if it's called Quiet Light Podcast or if it has a different name, but I'm sure you could find it by looking that up. So there's three for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. And I'm familiar with the Ice Cream for Investors podcast. I've definitely gotten a lot of value out of listening to that myself as well. What would be, Kyle, maybe one or two or three different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah. So it's just Kyle, Kyle, at webstreet.co. It's not .com, it's .co, which is our website as well. That's my email. I'm very active on there. LinkedIn as well. It's just my full name, LinkedIn / which can be quite an issue. So get it out of the title of this podcast or whatever. And then Twitter as well. We're just WebStreet at Twitter. I'm very active on there. Those would be the main ways. Not too hard to get a hold of.
Sounds good. And we'll definitely put those links in the show notes as well. Kyle, I've really appreciated having you on the show with us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. I've enjoyed it as well. Hopefully come back in a few years with some updates.
Sounds good. And Freedom Point podcast listeners, thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.